In Washington, right in the heart of US political power, an unprecedented meeting took place between top White House officials and a delegation from Azerbaijan. The talks, which had been secretly prepared for months, ended with the signing of a series of strategically important agreements. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but filled with determination. Both sides clearly understood that this wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about fundamentally shifting the geopolitical balance in the South Caucasus. The White House officially, he announced that a new era of cooperation between Washington and Baku has begun. According to the documents, Azerbaijan is giving the US expanded access to its military infrastructure, including several key air bases, which unofficially are said to be upgraded with help from American experts. In return, Washington promises to provide Baku with advanced technology, including air defense systems, next-gen drones, and training programs for Azerbaijani officers. Energy is a major focus of the deal. The US and Azerbaijan have agreed on long-term cooperation in the oil and gas sector, giving American companies direct access to Caspian resources. This part of the deal immediately set off alarms in Moscow, since Russia has seen the Caspian region as its strategic backyard for years. According to sources, the first groups of US military advisors are expected to arrive in Azerbaijan in the coming months. Their job is to assess the country's defense capabilities, as well as help integrate new weapons into the army. Some experts are already calling this a soft military occupation, where the country's independence is technically preserved. But the key security decisions start being made with direct involvement from the US. The Kremlin responded immediately. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement warning that any attempts to push Russia out of the South Caucasus would get a tough and asymmetric response. An emergency meeting was held at the Russian Security Council, where they discussed options ranging from countering economic pressure on Baku to increasing military presence in neighboring Armenia. Against this backdrop, global media started talking about a new phase of geopolitical rivalry, with Azerbaijan emerging as a key player. The question is how long Baku can keep balancing between getting support from the US and maintaining working ties with Moscow. Right after the official signing of the agreements, the Azerbaijani president made a bold statement that instantly the news spread across global news agencies. He emphasized that Baku is entering a new era of opportunities and is ready to use its cooperation with the US to strengthen the military, modernize the economy, and attract major investments. Under the agreement, Azerbaijan is giving American companies priority access to its key oil and gas projects, including the strategic Shah Deniz field. This means that a significant portion of Caspian energy resources will now be controlled by closely connected entities linked to Washington. For Azerbaijan, this is a chance to diversify exports and reduce reliance on Russian routes. But for Moscow, it's a serious blow to their energy interests. The reaction in the Russian capital was extremely harsh. The Russian Foreign Ministry summoned the Azerbaijani ambassador for explanations and handed over a formal protest. Officials openly stated that such moves upset the balance of power in the region and could lead to unpredictable consequences. According to insiders, the Kremlin is considering imposing trade restrictions against Azerbaijan, as well as a review of the terms for transporting Caspian oil through Russian territory. Meanwhile, the White House is actively promoting the deal in the media, presenting it as a win for American diplomacy and a prime example of successful partnership with post-Soviet countries. American TV channels are showing footage from joint press conferences where the leaders of both countries smile and shake hands in front of the US and Azerbaijani flags. On the streets of Baku, the reaction is mixed. Some people welcome the agreement, hoping that an influx of Western investments will boost the economy, create new jobs, and lead to infrastructure upgrades. However, opposition groups and some experts warn that relying too much on Washington could cost the country its political independence and drag it into unwanted conflicts. Amid these developments, the Kremlin, according to leaks, is preparing a series of countermeasures. These include fast-tracking the modernization of military facilities in Armenia and expanding economic ties, cooperation with Iran and Turkmenistan, as well as attempts to bring Turkey into the conversation about curbing American influence. Analysts agree that the deal between the US and Azerbaijan isn't just a one-time move, but a long-term strategic project that could seriously shake up the balance of power in the region. And it seems like the Kremlin is gearing up for a tough, drawn-out fight to hold onto its position in the South Caucasus. American think tanks and major media outlets are actively discussing the deal between the US and Azerbaijan, calling it's a geopolitical breakthrough and a new foothold for Washington in Eurasia. Experts point out that controlling Azerbaijan gives the US several strategic advantages. First, it provides access to the Caspian Sea, allowing control over energy transport routes. Second, its proximity to Iran enables the deployment of intelligence and defense systems right near the Iranian border. Third, it offers influence over the South Caucasus, a region where the interests of Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the West all collide. According to experts, the deal paves the way for Azerbaijan to join the Western security system. There's already talk about Baku taking part in joint military exercises with NATO right on its own soil. American military engineers have started designing upgrades for several bases, including those close to the Russian border. This is a really painful signal for the Kremlin. Just a few years ago, this kind of scenario seemed impossible. Moscow knows that losing influence over Azerbaijan will lead to a significant weakening of Russia's position in the South Caucasus. According to sources, several scenarios are being discussed at the General Staff. First, diplomatic pressure and attempts to break the agreement through intermediaries like Turkey. Second, economic pressure, including higher transit tariffs, trade restrictions, and possible blocking of some Azerbaijani goods in the Russian market. Third, a military presence that could be strengthened in Armenia and the Caspian Sea. At the same time, Russian media are actively spreading materials accuse the US of geopolitical raiding and stirring up a new wave of color revolutions in the region. They claim Washington uses economic aid as a tool for political control, with military expansion hidden behind investments. But officials in Baku deny these accusations, saying their cooperation with the US is a practical move to modernize the economy, boost tech sectors, and ensure the country's security in tough times. The international situation. The president of Azerbaijan said in an interview, "We're open to everyone, but we'll work with those who respect our sovereignty and are ready to invest in our future." Meanwhile, Tehran is keeping a close eye on things. Iranian authorities are worried about the possibility of American military bases popping up in neighboring Azerbaijan. Iranian experts believe this could pose a threat not just to Iran's national security, but to the entire region. So, this deal goes beyond just a two-way relationship and turns into a complex geopolitical puzzle involving the interests of several major players. In Azerbaijan, the news about the strategic agreement with the US sparked a strong reaction among the public. In the streets of Baku and other big cities, there were protests both supporting and opposing the deal. Supporters say it's a chance for the country to step out of the shadows of the big powers and gain access to advanced technology and modern weapons. They see serious investment opportunities. They believe that working Washington will strengthen national security and make the economy more resilient. However, the opposition warns that increasing American influence could lead to a loss of some sovereignty. Opposition leaders say the country risks becoming a pawn in the US's geopolitical game against Russia and Iran. At some rallies, people are chanting slogans like, "No foreign bases, sovereignty above all." The government, meanwhile, insists that the agreement, it doesn't mean foreign troops will be permanently stationed there, and all military programs will be carried out under the supervision of Azerbaijani authorities. Still, leaks about plans to set up training centers with American instructors are raising more and more questions among the public. The White House, commenting on the situation, emphasized that the US sees Azerbaijan as a reliable and promising partner in the region. American officials also said they're ready to support Baku, not just militarily, but in its overall development too. Civil sectors from energy to IT. In Moscow, such statements are seen as part of Washington's strategic push. Russian analysts point out that the US most often cements its influence through economic projects, gradually turning them into political and military leverage. Meanwhile, Turkey, a traditional ally of Azerbaijan, is trying to take a wait and see approach. Ankara officially welcomes the strengthening of ties between Baku and the US, but behind the scenes, it's worried that going too far might. Washington's influence could limit Turkey's sway in the region. Some Turkish experts openly talk about possible competition over Azerbaijan. On the international stage, this is seen as the start of a new phase in the struggle for the South Caucasus. The European Union, while not playing a major role in the military side of the deal, is ready to get involved in economic projects so it doesn't lose out entirely to the US. In the end, despite Azerbaijan's government insisting on staying neutral, it's clear the country is getting pulled in deeper and deeper. It's getting pulled into the orbit of American influence. This isn't just diplomatic cooperation anymore. It's a long-term strategy that could reshape the region's political landscape for the next decade. Moscow, realizing it's losing control of the situation, started moving on several fronts at once. One of the key moves was actively getting closer to Turkey. Even though Ankara and Baku have been close allies historically, the Kremlin is counting on Turkey not wanting Azerbaijan to completely fall under American influence. USA, Russian diplomats, and military officials have kicked off a series of intense talks with their Turkish counterparts, pitching new joint projects in energy, logistics, and defense industries. According to diplomatic sources, during negotiations in Ankara, the Russian side proposed expanding Turkey's role in Caspian projects and setting up a joint defense consortium that could serve as an alternative to American arms supplies to Azerbaijan. However, the Turks are cautious. On one hand, it's in their interest to maintain. On one hand, they want to keep their influence in Baku, but on the other, they don't want to mess up their relationship with Washington either. Against this backdrop, Russian state media launched a big info campaign targeting the US-Azerbaijan deal. Federal TV channels and online platforms started airing analysis accusing Washington of plotting a geopolitical shake up in the South Caucasus. The message is that behind the fancy talk about partnership, there are plans for military expansion, and Azerbaijan is at risk, turned into a Pentagon outpost on the border with Russia and Iran. Meanwhile, experts in Moscow are actively discussing ways to put economic pressure on Baku. Suggestions include tightening transit rules for Azerbaijani goods passing through Russian territory, raising tariffs on import-export operations, and restricting Azerbaijani companies' access to the Russian market. However, the Kremlin realizes that too much pressure could completely push Azerbaijan away and drive it even further toward a closer alignment with the US. At the same time, Russia is ramping up its military presence in Armenia. They've started upgrading the infrastructure at the Gyumri base, and new helicopters and drone systems have been spotted arriving at the Erebuni airfield in Yerevan. This sends a clear message to both Baku and Washington. Moscow is ready to defend its interests in the region, not just with words, but with force. In Turkey, watching how things are unfolding, people have started to cautiously weigh in. Some Turkish analysts openly say that this build-up, American influence in Azerbaijan, could lead to Turkey having less say in Baku's big strategic decisions. But officials keep insisting that the Turkey-Azerbaijan alliance remains rock solid, no matter what's going on outside. Against this tricky diplomatic backdrop, the region's starting to look more and more like a chessboard where the US, Russia, and Turkey are making careful but crucial moves. One wrong move or misstep could shake up the balance of power for decades. Washington, encouraged by the success of the deal with Azerbaijan, they started actively promoting it as a model for other post-Soviet countries. The White House says this partnership is based on mutual benefit, respect for sovereignty, and economic integration. But in Moscow, they see it as just a cover for expanding American military and political influence. A top US official said in an interview that Baku has shown even countries in tricky geopolitical spots can find their own path to freedom and prosperity, choosing to cooperate with the democratic world. These words sparked a strong reaction in Russian media, where they were seen as a direct hint at Russia losing influence in the post-Soviet space. In response, the Kremlin announced a tough decision to speed up the integration of the CSTO military structures and ramp up economic pressure on Azerbaijan. The plan calls for closer coordination between Russia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Belarus on defense matters. At the same time, Moscow is stepping up. They're reaching out diplomatically to Iran, proposing joint projects to ensure security in the Caspian region and to oversee maritime transport routes. Experts believe Russia is gearing up for a long-term standoff. Unlike short-term crises like local military conflicts, this battle for influence in Azerbaijan will go on for years and will need a comprehensive strategy, from economic pressure and information campaigns to military shows of force. Meanwhile, in Azerbaijan, despite outside pressure, the authorities, they're continuing to strengthen ties with the US. Preliminary agreements have already been signed for the supply of American technology in renewable energy, cybersecurity, and transport infrastructure modernization. Baku hopes that Western investments will help reduce dependence on raw material exports and create new high-tech industries. But behind the scenes, it's not so clear-cut. Some members of Azerbaijani establishment worry that getting too deeply involved with the Americans could be risky. The situation could complicate relations not just with Russia, but also with Iran, which traditionally sees any US military presence near its borders as a national security threat. Meanwhile, international observers note that the deal between the US and Azerbaijan has already sparked a new phase of global rivalry. The South Caucasus is turning into a battleground where the interests of major powers mix with regional ambitions, and the future political landscape remains uncertain. Analysts believe this is just the beginning. A long game is underway where every move will have consequences far beyond the Caucasus. The US, Russia, Turkey, and Iran will keep vying for influence, and Azerbaijan will find itself right in the middle of this complicated and risky game, where every step could change the fate of the country and the entire region.